I think I'm saying that we struggle all our lives to answer it. But it's the struggle that is important. That's what helps us to define our place in the universe.
This is Beverly, Dr. Beverly, Dr. Beverly Crusher.
Look where we are. Here, all of us, in this moment. So let's do what we spent our entire lives learning to be great at.
And this is Crusher Convo. And welcome to Crusher Convo, where we're crushing the conversation one episode at a time. Today we are discussing the Borg versus the Crushers and the irony that Beverly saving the Borg in TNG ended up with having her own Borg baby in Picard. And in the guest seat today has been 2 years in the making.
2 years? Really?
2 years it has. I have the wonderful host and Trek Wars podcast, Kenny. Welcome, Kenny.
Hello. It's a wonderful catharsis to finally get 2 years having been finally paid off. It's so wonderful to be here, Jesse. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to have you. I mean, you reached out the moment Crusher Convo went from, Twitter Spaces to podcasts. And I was like, okay, great. We'll get you on. And when I tried, you got busy and then I got busy and then
Sounds right.
Life happened. Right. So, that's why I was like, I'm getting you on. We're making this happen. So
and here we are. It's happening.
Here we are. It's happening. I'm so excited. But I have a question for you.
Yes.
So what is your Trek and why?
What is my Trek? Oh boy.
I'm making it difficult for everybody this season.
Oh my gosh. I mean, my first answer is Star Trek 6. Unless I have to pick one of the series, in which case, oh boy.
Whatever you want. Whatever you feel is like got you into Trek that you love.
I mean, that's an incredibly hard question because as opposed to like you're a recent convert to Star Trek in the relative scheme of it, as opposed to like my Star Trek journey, where my Star Trek journey is I literally don't remember a time where I didn't watch Star Trek. It is something that I've been watching since literally before memories were formed. Like it was something that I was watching since I was an infant. So it was always there for me. So I guess Next Generation would be my Trek. You give me a good meeting around a conference table. Give me give me good liberal values, just sitting around a table being like, but could we talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
I think we could talk our way out of this. And they're going, but there's a crystalline entity that is destroying everything. And the answer, but Picard is still going, I think we could probably still talk about it. That's it. Although I will say Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks are definitely fighting for my affections. And Prodigy, it's such a hard question. Can you ask me again tomorrow?
Definitely. I'll email you. Sleep on it.
Star Trek 6, though, you asked me my favorite movie of all time. It's Star Trek 6. There's just something about the vibes of that movie. And the way that is a reflection of history at that moment in time, and the reflection of so much at that point of whenever it was made in 91.
Yeah.
And the acting in that movie, the direction, the production value, the action, the dialogue, the tension.
Yeah. They went all for it in that last movie. They really did.
Boy, oh boy, the signatures at the end. I remember watching Avengers Endgame, and sure, everyone pumps whatever Captain America gets Thor's hammer, but whatever the signatures show up at the end, I was pumping my fist, being like, they're doing it. They're Star Trek 6ing it. Yes.
Yes. Hey, you got to. I mean, I think that was just a really nice way to a nice send off for them, right? I think that was a beautiful little thing. I remember when I was watching all of the original movies and I was tweeting about it and I was doing my reactions and stuff like that. And 5, I was bored. I was like, I'm falling asleep, guys. I don't know if I could do this. I finished it.
That's correct.
But as I was like, okay, I'm going to get into 6. I've heard good things. It's night and day from 5. And I was all like, okay, applause. Like I was just like, this is a good way to end it. So I agree with that. Oh, we have a couple people in the chat. We have J. Marie finally made it to a live one. Hello. And Sarah, sorry I'm a bit late. So were we. So it's fine. We're all good. It's our Friday. We got on, but we're here. Okay. But yes, I think, there's good Trek and there's not so good Trek, but in the, grand scheme of things, all Trek is good Trek in a lot of ways.
Truly, I have multiple copies of Star Trek Into Darkness on my Blu-ray shelf. All Trek is good Trek. Yeah, give it to me. Give it to me.
Anything is good. Now, today, though, we are going to be talking about a specific topic of the Borg versus the Crushers. And the reason why I decided to do this episode was because I just so happened to be watching iBorg. And, Beverly was very passionate about not using Hugh as an, instrument of destruction of the Borg. And I was like, wow, that really bit her in the butt 30 years later. So I was like, this is an episode that we need to talk about. But let's go ahead and get this started. I'm going to mention here the Borg episodes of TNG. And I was kind of actually surprised. There's not a lot.
No.
And so, I mean, we see a lot. There's some in DS9. There's some, especially in Voyager, obviously, because of 7 of 9. And of course, we also see it in Enterprise, which I'm still in season 3. I haven't been able to get through it because I've been busy with work. But oh my gosh, that episode with the Borg.
Wonderful.
I loved that.
Wonderful.
I loved it.
Episode.
The fact
and then you get to, so you're watching Enterprise for the first time.
I am. Yeah.
How outstanding you get to watch season 4 for the first time. How wonderful. How wonderful.
I'm still trying to get to season 3. I'm not really a Zindi.
I understand, but I'm just so excited for you.
I'm excited for 4. I hear 4 is great. But the thing is that episode I loved because of just circles back to the first contact. And I was like, that's storytelling. That is what I'm talking about. But as you could see, the first time we saw the Borg was in season 2, Q Hugh. I know a lot of Beverly Crusher fans do not watch season 2, but it is a good episode, guys. I do recommend it. Of course, we have Best of Both Worlds in season 3 to season 4, season 5, episode 23, I Borg, season 6 to season 7, Descent, and then, of course, the Next Generation movie, First Contact. Now, do you have a love-hate relationship with the Borg? Are you middle of the road? I do have a poll later on that kind of asks this question, but I'm feeling, what are your feelings on the whole Borg storyline? Maurice Hurley did, not a fan of Maurice, but he did create the Borg. It was a good concept. And
not a fan of Maurice because he's a grump.
He's a grump, and
he's a grump who is like Roddenberry's ideas are wackadoo.
And then he fired a very important person that to this podcast. So yes, but the Borg is a good idea.
Yes, of course. Yes, let's not be a fan of Maurice, of course.
No.
Yes. I like the idea of the Borg as a force of nature versus what First Contact kind of contextualized it, or recontextualized or retconned it as with the Borg Queen, and then it just kind of continued to be as, because it's hard to keep going back to the well of the Borg, which makes sense that Next Generation had such a sparse amount of Borg episodes.
Right.
Because you have Q, which is just going...
explaining what's going to happen. Mm-hmm.
Which is also probably Maurice Hurley going, Roddenberry's ideas are wackadoo. Let's kind of introduce this idea that let's have this ultimate idea that these people are cocky and this ultimate force. And that's a wonderful idea, and the way that they're executed is so wonderful. And then Best of Both Worlds, I was watching her earlier today just to kind of
refresh the memory
and also indulge, because why not? Spoiler alert, what a great episode.
Yeah. Still, I think I've heard from fans, it's like, or not even just Trek fans, it was one of the best finales with that, cliffhanger at the
Truly.
end,
Truly.
Yeah. It was a long 3 months for those young Trek fans.
And then, whereas I feel like so many subsequent episodes kind of dive into the lore aspect, pun intended, of who the Borg are and what the history is, they're really using Borg as a metaphor to kind of explore Riker's journey of all things, which is wild. We never really think of Best of Both Worlds as a Riker episode, but it is it is the ultimate Riker episode, and then Riker doesn't really get many juicy episodes after that, although Frame of Mind really tries hard. The Hugh episode.
That's a big one.
Oh my gosh, you literally just had it on the board. Beautiful
episode.
iBorg. Yes, of course. Dodoy.
You were like, Hugh episode. I was like, yeah, it's great. I was like, oh, wait, I need to help him. Okay, I'm here. I got you. Again, guys, it's our Friday. We're hanging
It's our Friday. Friday is my name. A brilliant episode, wonderful deconstruction of who the Borg are, challenging the notions of Star Trek, challenging the notions of what our enemies can be, challenging the notions of empathy, challenging Picard's journey as well. Descent, great sequel. Interesting, well, maybe not great sequel, but interesting sequel to that.
Especially bring lore into it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then First Contact is big, dumb fun that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
And it would have been fine if they just kind of left the Borg alone, and they didn't, and that's okay.
That's part of the tricorder rating later on that we'll get into. Sarah does say here that that is her daughter's favorite series. I'm assuming Enterprise when we were talking about it, or TNG, but she does say her other is DS9. And I do have some people over on Instagram. David Jones, who I'm going to be talking to tomorrow, he says, have a great show. And then Leslie says, I've only seen The Next Generation and Picard. Lindsay says, Bev is the reason we have any resolution with the Borg. Very true. And also Leslie said, nope, we'll never watch season 2. I do not blame you. And then, of course, it says, yes, he did, and it bit him in the end. I'm not sure which comment that was for, but also Descent Parts 1 and 2 are my favorite of the Borg. Of course, we do love Descent 2 because we had Captain Beverly with the Enterprise and going into the sun. We can't ignore that part.
Right.
J. Marie says, I liked Q Hugh. Starfleet had become
what? Become what, J. Marie?
Become what? I know this is now a mystery. But the main focus we're going to be talking about is Best of Both Worlds, is going to be iBorg and, of course, Picard Season 3. So I'm actually going to go ahead and start with a clip of each of those, and then we'll kind of discuss a little bit. So the first one is going to be Best of Both Worlds.
Jean-Luc.
Captain.
Enterprise, get us out of here.
And of course, Best of Both Worlds, the Borg began an invasion of Federation space much sooner than was expected. With the Enterprise unable to affect them, the Borg capture Captain Picard and turn him into one of their own. I love that scene because I loved how Beverly tried to go to him. Like, even though he is turning into a Borg, she had to reach him, right? And Data had to stop her. I always thought that was such a powerful little moment. I don't even think it's scripted. I think I even looked, and I think that was just Gates' way of just adding, more to the story, right? But like we were saying, Best of Both Worlds, a lot of action. All this was going on. The big ending going into part 2, and this was really the beginning of Picard's journey and PTSD and everything of what he went through. Being assimilated was extremely traumatic. We see that later with Seven, about how she was just a child and she grew up that way and had to be rehuman again, right? I think Seven's story is one of the best story arcs in Star Trek. And it was just one of those things that it was like, okay, what are they going to go with this? And, the Borg is such a, you know, it's such a hard villain, right? Like it's so not easy to defeat these guys. And that is why it was just a problem. And of course, showing the other episodes, it really showcased Picard's PTSD, which in a lot of sense, Star Trek never really showed that. It was like, okay, we got mind raped the day, the episode before, but now we're fine, In this sense, it was very nice to have that continuity of the story, even in small little aspects of other episodes that had nothing to do with the Borg, right? So, overall, with you, did you really like, oh my gosh, like when you saw Best of Both Worlds, were you like, oh my gosh, the Borg is just unbeatable? How are they ever going to defeat them? What's going to happen next?
I mean, again, that's such a difficult question because literally, I don't remember watching this episode for the first time. It's an episode that has always been embedded in my mind. I've just been like,
Right.
yes, best. Here is what the constants of the world are. Water is wet, the sun and the moon exist, and Best of Both Worlds is one of the great episodes of TV. Period. It's those four things that exist within the pantheon of the things. One of the things that, coming back to this episode every single time, though, is, and I know that it's the Crusher combo, but if you would allow me to go in a little
Go
bit
for
of a
it.
tangent,
Go for it.
as I said before, it's the ultimate Riker episode. It's the ultimate Riker episode, but the rest of Star Trek treats this as this is the Picard episode, and it makes sense because Picard goes through the ultimate trauma here, and it informs like his most, like, it informs some of the greatest pieces of Star Trek going forward, including Iborg, First Contact, and 3 seasons of Picard. But really, it's about Riker dealing with an unstoppable force of nature and having to deal with an impossible situation of having to possibly kill his captain, as well as how the Borg work best, which is more kind of like a force of nature, like a storm, like an unstoppable storm, which is, again, that's hard to go back to that well narratively.
Yeah.
Especially if you're traveling through the Delta Quadrant and you want to keep going back to the Borg well. That's
Mm-hmm.
fine. But there's just something really wonderful about Riker. Talking with my friend Andrea from the wonderful Coach Beard's book club. But anyways, talking about how great Shelby is of an antagonist, like to Riker,
Mm-hmm.
because Shelby is basically Riker circa season 1, where he's
Correct.
just a young upstart and he's ambitious.
Yes.
And at some point he gets comfortable. At this point, he's a little older, a little more seasoned. And it's that notion of what the heck does he really want? And then being thrown into the deep end, and how do you handle it? And the answer is you gotta follow your bliss. And then also, just to bring it around back to Beverly, watching that episode, they're like, what the heck do we do? How do we stop this? Beverly, the one that is able to pull the Borg cube out of warp in part 1, just by going, let's think about this from the mosquito's point of view. If we zap it enough, maybe it stop enough to scratch it. That's a good tactical mind right there, by zapping all of those nodes that are up there. Because everyone else, including Shelby, the young upstart Borg expert, is just like, what do we do? No, Beverly's got it on lock. Beverly is like, nah, we got this. Let's just sting a little bit. Just bite a little bit. Why not?
Well, I think also too, because she's focused in trying to find Picard. She's being professional. She's totally thinking outside the box. But what I liked about part 2 is how seeing him, as that picture showed, well, he is completely Borg. And she's like, it's rewriting his DNA and I don't know how to stop it. And she's trying to do all these things in her mind of like, what how do I deborgify him, And I mean, it eventually comes and she understands and she knows how to take out the nanoprobes and all of that stuff later on, which I think also is full circle later on, because I think that's how they use it for in season 1 of Picard for the Borg project, to bring back Borg, or even the Doctor to Seven, right? I think Beverly paved that way of, how to deborg these people. And but it's such a good overall arc. And like I said, just the continuity for Picard. But I'm happy you mentioned Riker, because it does showcase him a lot of being like not being able to be in Picard's shadow anymore, because he would just kind of follow him and just do his thing and just be like, yeah, go Picard. But now he had to make those tough decisions. And his tough decision was fire.
Yeah.
Like everyone was like, we could go save him. Even Shelby was like,
even
send us
Shelby.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Send us back. We'll go grab him. And he's like, no, we have no time. It's either Picard or it's everybody. And he had to make that difficult choice. And I'm so glad that it showcased that he can still do it, because Shelby was kind of poking and prodding him a little bit, being all like, you don't have the guts kind of attitude. And he was showing, all right, let me show you guts.
Shelby's ambitious because she's got something to prove. Riker has nothing to prove anymore. He's willing to make the hard call whenever it comes to it. He is truly... I mean, this is the wonderful thing about Next Generation under Roddenberry, sort of, which is just the no conflict aspect of it, where where our main characters are just like, we get along. They have found satisfaction here. Riker has found his place. And sure, there's some interrogation of being like, have I found my place? The answer is yes. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's really nice. That's really nice.
I do enjoy that. Now, Sarah had mentioned that she's all like, would Jack's children have Borg DNA later on? And I have a theory there, Sarah. So tune in and a little bit later when we get to Picard season 3. But Best of Both Worlds took away the idea that the captain was Teflon, if you get what I want to say. Maybe. She did, Jay Marie did, because we weren't sure what you were trying to say. She said, I liked Q Hugh. Starfleet had become complacent. And it's true. This was Q's way of being like, don't get so cozy, right? Something's going to happen. And this was kind of the time where you noticed that Q was actually really trying to help them more than we thought. But let's dive right into the next aspect, which is going to be Borg.
We're at war.
There's been no formal declaration of war.
Not from us, but certainly from them. They've attacked us at every encounter.
They've declared war on our way of life. We are to be assimilated.
But even in war, there are rules. You don't kill civilians indiscriminately.
There are no civilians among the Borg.
Think of them as a single collective being. There's no one Borg who is more an individual than your arm or your leg.
How convenient.
Your point, Doctor.
When I look at my patient, I don't see a collective consciousness. I don't see a hive. I see a living, breathing boy who has been hurt and who needs our help. And we're talking about sending him back to his people as an instrument of destruction.
So Borg, the discovery of an injured adolescent Borg, brings to the surface hard feelings for both Captain Picard and Guinan for what the Borg collective had done to them. Matters are complicated when plans to use the young Borg to destroy his people are halted when it is discovered that the Borg has become an individual. I took this off of Memory Alpha, and I actually found it kind of interesting that it mentioned Guinan. Guinan was important because Picard had listened to Beverly bringing Hugh on board. But what Beverly didn't know is that Picard in the back of his mind was like, yeah, bring it on, and we're going to do something really bad. Okay. And of course, he wasn't going to mention that to Guinan just yet. But for Guinan, she's all like, are you sure you know what you're doing? And of course, later on, she was the one that convinced Picard that this is not a normal Borg, this is an individual, things like that. But it was really that Beverly paved the way for that. She fought for Hugh to come on. She mentioned how much he was a patient. She's all like, that's why I did this clip. She was like, he is a living, breathing boy and he is hurt and needs our help. That's all she sees. She's like, I don't see a collective. I don't see a hive. I see one individual. And it was her fighting that, because then Geordi had to work with him and saw that this was different. And then all of a sudden it went to Guinan. And then like it just spread out. And it was because of Beverly that everyone started to change their tune, and then eventually Picard. But I just found it interesting because if they didn't do this, if they ended up using Hugh as an instrument of destruction, nothing that happened in season 3 of Picard would have gone down. I mean, Jack still would have had that DNA because Picard was already assimilated, but there wouldn't have been any Borg for Jack to reach out to like a beehive. That's where I was all like, oh, Beverly being that doctor and, Hippocratic oath and putting her patients first, it really bit her in the butt in the end, like I said, because then all of a sudden later on, she's fighting the Borg for her son. And we'll get more into that as that comes. But I think Borg really just shifted of like, the Borg was this villain. That's all we saw them as. Resistance is futile. We're going to assimilate you. They just saw, and then they kind of just separated it and were like, oh, wait, but these were people once. This was a child who got assimilated, and Beverly was able to see that.
Yes. I mean, it puts more rules on top of the Borg because it's still at this point in time, we don't exactly know what the rules of the Borg are. Assimilation is still kind of a nebulous term. We know that they turned to Picard. We don't exactly know. It was first contact that kind of established here's exactly what assimilation means with the cold tubules and the nanoprobes and all of those things. And it's very cool.
Right.
But this is the first time where we put a face to the name, or we put a face to the force of nature that is the Borg. We put an individual perspective in this notion of, well, and also, I mean, this is just a wonderful thing about Beverly that runs through the entire show, which is empathy by any means, no matter what, even whenever it challenges her own personal code. It's just like, I shouldn't give you the benefit of the doubt, but gosh darn it.
Right.
I have to because it's the correct thing to do. And not that it's even necessarily that much of a struggle here because, as in the clip, she sees a scared boy. Which is wild because watching this episode, I'm going, I see a grown man, which also, I don't know. You should get Jonathan Del Arco on the podcast and talk.
Think about it.
Yeah. Talk to them about the wild arc of playing this character over the amount of time that they did. Yes. And then also, I mean, forcing Picard and forcing Guinan to challenge their own preconceived notions of prejudice. It's fascinating and also be interesting to revisit this. Or certainly there are smarter people than I, but also revisiting this through a 2025 lens. I don't know. What do the Borg represent within 2025? What do the Borg represent politically? What do the Borg represent in terms of being a force of nature, in terms of being a representative of terrorism, in terms of otherism? This evil notion of thought that is so disadvantageous to possibly personal liberation or personal satisfaction. Because I'm even watching my own language because the notion of the personal, it's and pardon me if I'm going a little bit too much tangential, but it's these notions of, I don't know, it is just the Borg are a destructive force because it's such an alien way of thinking.
Yeah. And I think too, Star Trek was always very good to kind of play about how things are during our time and using that as an image of like you were saying, like how would the Borg fit? Like what would be that in 2025? And unfortunately, it's amazing how they were able to use it back in the 90s and it's still relevant to this day. But that's what's so good about Star Trek because it also starts conversations.
It kind of makes it in the limited amount of geopolitical notions that I know of the late 80s, early 90s. It makes sense to kind of introduce the Borg in the late 80s or early 90s as the Cold War is wrapping up. And we're looking for other enemies that don't necessarily represent the Soviets. And here's the Borg being a force of nature, something that is completely uncontrollable, that doesn't necessarily, it represents the ultimate other, represents technology. Well, although there's the argument is there that it represents collective action because it's a metaphor for communism, and it is the ultimate evolution of collective action. It is the ultimate evolution of we are all in agreement. Nothing is for the individual. It is all for the greater good. But I guess it's so perverted. So I guess it's the communist ideal taken to the nth degree, to a way where it is, as opposed to like in Star Trek 6, where Nicholas Meyer is just like, did you know the Klingons are stand-ins for the Soviet Union? And then the further that we go in for the Borg, it becomes less a reflection of those communist values and more just a reflection of the other that we don't trust, and just the enemy that we need because we need someone to fight, which is also just a reflection of what America was post-Cold War, where it's looking for an enemy, and it's just kind of like, we need someone to fight Borg. We could fight Borg. Why not Borg? We can make Borg fit plot. Perhaps, but make no mistake, I dig it. I've watched Dark Frontier many times.
That's actually a really good segue because real fast in Instagram. So we have Jay from Three Geeks Podcast. He says, the Borg rocks, LOL. They are my favorite baddies in the universe. That came from Leslie. And kind of circling back with Riker, J. Marie had said Riker liked being a first officer, which, yes, I just don't think he was ready to be captain or at least leave the Enterprise. She did also say, I wish we saw Jean-Luc, so Picard meeting Seven. That would have been nice.
Really, yes.
And Sarah did said, I did read a fanfic recently by someone on Archive who wrote that not only was Jack being used by the Borg, but Beverly was being used too to eventually become the new Borg queen. That would have been kind of cool. We did have a few like ideas where voice was in his head because that's how the Borg queen was trying to get to him. And we thought, what if the Borg queen, because she was so just disfigured, if she used Beverly's image to try and get Jack? But again, segue. So let's just go ahead and hit season 3 head on with this scene from Vox.
Jack has never been assimilated.
There are no nanoprobes in his system. There are no transceivers, no receivers.
The voices in his head are distinct. My gifts aren't perfect, but I have never mistaken Borg.
Biology doesn't always need words to communicate. Flocks of birds turn in unison, the architecture of a beehive, an ant colony, all wordlessly connected. Some transceivers and receivers are organic. So too must be the technology inside Jack. No one has seen or heard from the Borg in over a decade. So perhaps the Borg have evolved.
No. The only thing I've ever passed on is my Hippocratic syndrome.
You never had Hippocratic syndrome. That is why Sung kept your body at Daystrom. He saw that there was something else. What Vatic knew, that the Borg had passed something on to Jack, some organic technology through Locutus.
Now, of course, in this episode, so I'm reading off from Vox, it says a devastating revelation about Jack alters the course of Picard's and Beverly's life forever and uncovers a truth that threatens every soul in the Federation. The final battle begins as Picard and his crew race to save the galaxy from annihilation, but not without a gut-wrenching cost. The one thing that I kept saying when I was watching season 3 of Picard, we saw season 1, and I think how they used the Borg in that was brilliant. It still showed Picard's PTSD. It showed how Hugh did become an individual and he was trying to make changes and things like that. Season 2 of Picard, however, didn't really make much sense in my opinion. I know they were trying to go off in this totally different reality, different timeline. It just didn't work well within the story. So if we kind of just pluck season 2 out of that and going straight to season 3, I kept saying, Jack is not only the son of Picard, he's the son of Locutus. Jack is not only the son of Picard, he's the son of Locutus. And I kept saying that through the whole entire time. So when he was having these voices, when he was having his eyes read and things were happening, I just knew something had to happen. And so when this revelation came up that, let's go back to best of both worlds. Okay, she said his DNA is being rewritten. Okay, so of course, then all of a sudden later on, when it comes to all good things, she was all like, you have an anomaly in your parietal lobe that was never there before. So they connected these, with the red string, right? They're connecting these dots to make sense of, well, this is what happened. So this got organically passed on to Jack, unbeknownst to Beverly, which she felt guilty. And I know Sarah was questioning that. Do you think that Jack's children would have Borg DNA? I think yes, just in the fact that they're not going to be able to take it out. They thought it was Irumodic syndrome. It's in his brain. That is why they stole Picard's body. They took a portion of that parietal lobe. There's no way that they're going to be able to take it out. It is part of him. And so, but of course, like Jay Marie says here, I think how guilty she must have been when she found out that DNA was passed on. And she was. It showed it in the episode. She was like, how could I have missed this? But none of them could have guessed it because they didn't have that technology back then to understand this is what was going on. But that's where I was like, this just totally comes full circle, because here she is, she's trying to save this individual, but then it ended up hurting her in the end because now her son got affected, and it's not Picard's fault. He was violated, he was stolen and put through all this stuff. And, so that's why I loved, even when she's fighting the Borg ship and everything, we call her the Borg Slayer, because she's just blazing Bev, pew, 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 going all around. That was like the best scene. And she was all like, no one wants to, rip him limb from him like me right now, because now she's pissed, because now she's like, okay, now they're just trying to steal my son, which when the Borg Queen goes, I'm being like a mother to Jack, and he's like, you are not his mother, and he tries to shoot her. It's like they have destroyed these people's lives for so long. And it wasn't even just Picard's life, it was everybody. Riker had to make that tough decision. Beverly had to de-assimilate Picard. Deanna had to go through his therapy of trying to deal with what had happened. Okay. So everyone played a role and everyone was affected at some degree. And now this was this powerful moment of like, well, now we have a child who organically is a Borg and who can literally destroy the universe. Like at the end of this clip, Deanna's saying he was a weapon against humanity, and now there's protocols, and now he is dangerous. And they're like, well, shit, and it's just, again, coming full circle. I think just putting that from when they started to ending it here, I think that was done very well. I don't think it needs to go any further, right? But I think that's always going to be a part of him, especially since now Jack is part of the Enterprise G and Seven being his captain. She is going to be there for him and help him understand what he is. Of course, she's a little bit different than he is, but in the end, there's just now this camaraderie of like, we were all victims of this and we came out to it. And now where do we go from here? There's my tangent. Oh, real quick. So we got Fathery from Tech Trek. Howdy, howdy. Just stopping by to say hi. Hi.
Hi.
I know you, I think. So thank you for stopping by. Sarah says, ooh, so how would that affect Jack and Sydney's children? Would the Jurati Borg be able to use that to their advantage? I feel like the Jurati Borg from season 2, where she was protecting, I think that's a good Borg. And that's why season 2 is a little iffy, because we just don't know what track they're going on.
Yeah, I think the Jurati Borg wouldn't even be looking to use an advantage so much as it's a new form of Borg.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
That is built out of cooperation.
There were different queens, right? So like one queen dies, there's another one comes up. And the thing is that they're still a Delta Quadrant. Mm-hmm. Okay. They may have destroyed that Borg ship that was in the Alpha Quadrant, but there's still more. And so poor Jack's going to have to take, neural inhibitors for the rest of his life, so he doesn't even hear the voices or whatever, in order for him not to be drawn into them.
Are there Borg still canonically in the Delta Quadrant at this point in time? Because they destroyed the transport corridor.
Oh, they did.
There. And then in Picard, granted, I've only seen season 3 of Picard once. And they were hiding in Jupiter.
I think it's kind of confusing because Voyager showcases that's where they're from, right? They're
Sure.
from the Delta Quadrant.
Yes.
And then Q is showing, well, they went from the Delta Quadrant, or Delta to Alpha, and they did a homing beacon and stuff like that. But it just showcases that they're everywhere. Right. So
Yeah.
in all honestly, there
That's fine
could
for
still
me.
be some, right? I mean, the universe is vast and it's huge. So
Yes.
they could be more, and it could be a problem later on. Now, like I said, passing on to his children, there's really nothing that they could do probably with that except for taking neural inhibitors. But I think over time, like, it will probably disappear because they're not having babies with other organic Borg people. Now, you said you saw season 3 once. Did you see season 1 of Picard?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so you've seen all of it.
Yes, I have. I have very much so. Own all 3 of them on Steelbook over there on my shelf.
Nice.
Again, all Paramount has to do is slap the word Star Trek on it. I'm going to be like, cool. You bet I'll buy it. Day one, I'll absolutely get there. I was actually a little bit frustrated with how they treated Bev in season 3, especially giving Picard the catharsis with Jack at the end of that, as opposed to what I truly, and I'm not just pandering because I am on Crusher Convo, but at the end of it, because it's Picard who is able to talk Jack out of into doing the right thing. But in the grand scheme of things, Jean-Luc and Jack are new to each other. Granted, their relationship has changed so drastically over the course of a very short amount of time. But Beverly
raised him.
Yes.
Jack is Jack because of Beverly. And I wish I had an applause button because I'm kind of glad that you're bringing this up, because the one thing that we had wished as fans, as much as we loved Blazing Bev, we thought it was really cool for her to be on the Enterprise. We understand that she had to make that difficult decision because episode 1, she nearly died trying to protect her son. And then at episode 10, she had to make the difficult decision to sacrifice him to save everybody else. So there's that full circle storyline right there. But and I did like Picard saying, I've been running half my life and now I have something to go back for, right? I did like that. But
has he been running half of his life though? Has he? Or is that just what Picard has been saying to us?
Probably Picard, what he's been saying. But in the grand scheme of things, I think if Beverly had come down with him and they did it together, okay, I think that would have been and for her to be like, F you, bitch. Like, we really wanted to see her and them together just saving Jack, because she had been by herself for so long. She had sacrificed her entire life to protect him. And yes, Picard didn't know, and I get that. But this would have been the moment of them actually doing something together to protect their son and also bring him back from the darkness, you know?
Okay. Here we go. So
here we go.
Two things.
Everyone get ready. Strap your
seat. One. Next generation Picard's arc, the whole darn thing slaps you in the face with this character arc of it's family. It's about family. And in a counter for our point, he doesn't like kids. All good things. They're playing the great game of poker and he's surrounded by his friends. Family. It's about family. Just like Dominic Toretto in Fast and the Furious is about family. And then in Picard, it's all about Picard is the TV show Picard is telling us that Jean-Luc Picard is the most arrogant character that we've ever met. Whether that's true or not, whatever. But there we go. But what we do know,
old man, we know that.
Yes, even though Jean-Luc Picard and Picard is just like, could you use a hug? I'll give you a hug. I'm like, yes, absolutely. Meanwhile, you meet season 1 of Picard in Next Generation, and he can just look at you wrong, and you're like, you're right, Daddy. I definitely did do something wrong. I'll just jettison myself out of the airlock. But what we do know is that in season 1 of Picard, he had the arrogance to not reach out to his family of the Enterprise that he trusted for decades through his worst times of his life and best times, period. They have been through death and life together. And instead, and not because of contractual things, it'll be expensive to get the rest of the cast, but no, we bothered to make it a character reason. He didn't reach out because he didn't want to bother them. And then this time, cool, season 3, we're fighting the Borg again. And so how do we win? We win through collective action. We work together as a family again. We can't keep isolating. Beverly cannot just isolate once again on the SS Elias with her and Jack doing amazing, cool frontier medicine, which, make no mistake, I would watch 20 years of that TV show.
Hell yeah. Missed opportunity.
Oh my gosh. Picard can't just sit in his chateau and be like, I'll call Rios or I'll call Raffi and we'll go do adventures. Riker and Troy are in their own things. All of the characters are isolated, but it's only whenever they come together that they are able to reach some sort of catharsis. And if the threat is once again Borg, by showing a different kind of collective. And then, just like you said, Jesse, it can't just be Picard acting alone with Jack, or Jack alone as Borg reaching out, beaconing across the galaxy. No, it has to be Picard and Beverly together again as a family, showing we can't do this alone. We'll never be alone again. There's the show.
I mean, and that's what I felt was missing, right? It was just like Beverly should have been there. It just didn't make sense to have Riker. I mean, I think with Riker being on there was because of the whole Imzadi thing. And so I'm glad they did that, especially for the Riker and Troy fans. But why was Worf there? It didn't really make sense to have Worf there at all, except to be the funny bits. But
it was really funny, and also, like, I would also, and I'm not keen on watching a Captain Worf show, but I am keen on watching a Ronin-type Worf show where he is dedicated to a life of pacifism and he is navigating his inner rage and strength and trying to move on. That is different. That is interesting to me.
Right. And again, I understand where they were trying to go with the storyline because they wanted, like you had mentioned, you know, episode 1 of TNG, he hated children. And then at the very end, he has his own son. I could understand where they were going, but it just felt like it was missing something. So I adore season 3, but I know it's not perfect, obviously. Now Sarah does say in the chat, she went, oh my gosh, we should have had Picard and Beverly back together visually at the end of Picard season 3. They were meant to be together. I am still convinced that Bev was going to say, I love you to JL when they were on talking to him on the cube. Now I did love that scene because that was his way of forgiving her. And she knew that that was probably the last time that she might talk to him, right? Because she doesn't know what's going to happen. But again, it would have been nice for them to even go out together. She had to make the difficult decision to sacrifice him and their son. And in the sense, it should have been like, well, if we're going to die, we're together, right? There's that whole Beverly and Picard arc just would have been nice to have, even if they didn't end up together at the end of season 3. That just would have been nice to just be like, we are a family. Now, yes, we saw them take their son to school at the end, which was hilarious. Let's take Jack to college. And you could tell that they are now a family. This is Picard's family, right? Not only just Riker and everybody, but he has a family now with Beverly and Jack. But I don't know. I just feel like it just didn't hit the mark with that. But overall, I think just having Jack be organically a Borg and stuff like that and try to push Picard to face his demons, which was always the Borg, was a nice touch. But it was still missing stuff in that aspect. Now, Sarah says, great Picard impression.
Thank you. That's the first time that I've ever busted out my old Picard impression. I don't think I've got good in his prime Picard, but I think I might have old Patrick Stewart down on lock at this moment in time. I appreciate it.
I think you did very, very well. Now, Jay Marie did said Deanna messed up there. She opened that door
Truly.
and Jacqueline. And again, like,
that's a bad therapist, I gotta say.
So bad. She took off and he's like screaming, like, what did you find? And again, and then of course she tells him about protocol. And I was like, well, wait a second. You just wasn't that against protocol to just leave your patient screaming at the door? What did you find? Let's take a step back, Troy. Okay, just saying. Okay.
Look, Picard season 3 has some great moments, but it's not exactly firing all thrusters at all points. All right,
it's not at all. But I think again, overall, I think going from point A to point B with the Borg story, with Picard being assimilated and going through, because we did see his PTSD and stuff like that, and going through everything he did just to have his son have it. That's a crushing blow. No pun intended. But that's a crushing blow in all fronts. And then to know that he's going to have to live with this, and Picard's going to have to help him, and Beverly's going to have to help him, and Seven. And then that's where that family aspect comes into play. Right. But, Sarah says, what did you see? Poor Jack. He was just screaming. Poor Jack. Before we wrap this up, though, do you have any final thoughts, though, when it comes to this whole storyline? Again, I plucked season 2 out because Jurati Borg was a very different story.
I thought you were talking about season 2 of Next Generation, in which case I wanted to ask you, for April Fools, are you going to be doing Pulaski convo?
I would never do that to my listeners. But I will do a Pulaski episode. Okay, so I have done some season 2 episodes. Just be like, if Beverly was in the situation, what would she do?
I do think season 2 of Picard swings. It misses for sure, but it is trying something. It is trying something. It's trying something different. It is trying to do something without a lot of the trappings of Star Trek. That it's very ultimately, if you're slapping the label of Star Trek on it, I just want it to be good on its own terms. It doesn't exactly connect, but also I can see what Patrick Stewart is trying to do in terms of talking about his own journeys with PTSD and in terms of his own familial trauma, and then attempting to talk about what the heck is going on through today with season 2 of Picard. I'm also just tickled pink that you gave me such prime episodes for Crusher Convo. Good Lord.
It was the sick face spinner.
You could have had Larry Nemechek talk about these dang episodes. No, you wasted them on me. And I'm pleased as punch. I'm
actually real fast. To mention season 2 of Picard. It's good that you mentioned about his arc. I think the only thing that we got good out of that was the fact that we did see, because we always knew that Picard had a horrible father. And we definitely know he had a horrible brother. And so that trauma was good to see of like, oh, he experienced something even worse with his mom. And so having that was good that he was able to open up himself. So when season 3 came, and even Gates has talked about this, like he just barely dealt with his own, father and issues and stuff like that. So this was the only way, like he would not have been able to be a good father to Jack or even be a good husband or whatever to Beverly if he hadn't gone through that journey. The biggest issue that, and I've heard this somewhere, is that in season 1, I think it was Michael Chabon, who was the showrunner of Picard, and he just kind of forgot about Beverly. He even mentioned it because it was a part where Laris's husband, I can't remember his name, when someone write in the chat, quick.
Someone, please
help.
We could look it up on Memory Alpha, but we just don't have the bandwidth.
We do not. We're being very careful. The issue is that he was mentioning, he's like, well, have you talked to Geordi or Worf or Riker? And he stops and everyone's like, Beverly? Beverly? And And Michael was just like, I just forgot about her. And it's like, excuse me? And so I know for Terry, he did not forget about her. And he helped start season 2, which is why when he was having that talk with Guinan, he goes, that ship has sailed. And he says, I watched it go. He did that on purpose because he was going to be bringing Beverly back. He just didn't know how, but then he had to go to season 3. And so then all of a sudden we forgot about Beverly again. Shaban! God bless you, Sarah.
Very good.
So I think that's what we needed, J. Marie. Here's the thing. This is I said this was, I wish we had a Beverly moment with Jack, just like we had with Aliens, when Ripley was trying to get that little girl and she's like, you get away from her, you bitch. I wanted that moment and we didn't get it. So that is where I'm like, it hurts. It hurts a little bit. I'm going to check. Leslie says on Instagram, I'll pass on Pulaski. Thanks. I understand. It's fine. Like I said, I do. What would Beverly do? So don't worry. Beverly's in it.
I think Michael Chabon forgetting about Beverly just kind of speaks to how forgotten that character feels. And
whole point of this podcast.
Certainly.
We're not gonna forget her, right?
Yeah, definitely. To the point where like she's barely in Star Trek Nemesis. She's barely in the movies, which is so unfortunate.
Yeah.
And so it's not a surprise that she's forgotten, even though like within the text of the TV show, like Beverly and Picard are best friends, but because it's not one of the big episodes, the big action-packed episodes,
right?
Because none of the top 5 episodes are going to be like, you know what you got to watch? Attached.
Love it. It's my favorite episode.
The action-packed episode, Attached, where they realize that each other are hungry
for grandma's soup.
Yeah.
Her stew.
But like a fundamental episode, key episode. And that character has been shafted, which is unfortunate. I do enjoy how much she gets to do, but I wish that she had gotten to do even more. And then I know that I shot you this message. Friggin' Ryan Thomas Riddle's script on the stunt list.
Yeah.
Freaking Star Trek Oath is exactly what I want. Completely recontextualize the character of Beverly Crusher while also bringing it into a current zeitgeist, because I think it is valid of trying to ask, how do we work? How do we fundamentally do good work whenever the systems around us have completely failed? And while I definitely want to believe in the utopia of Starfleet and Federation and working within a system that just works.
Yeah.
How does it work? Don't ask the question. It just does. That's the fantasy aspect. Don't explain how it does. It just does. Okay. It just does.
What is it? Suspension of disbelief, right?
Yeah.
Just do it.
Exactly.
J. Marie does say there must be a book with Beverly and Jack. I beg Dayton Ward. If you ever get the chance, Dayton, please just write a book. David Mack, someone, just something of those. A lot's happened in 20 years, and we would love to see that.
If there's a comic book series that exists of Leonard McCoy, Frontier Doctor, where he's going around with his awesome big honking 70s beard and his big medallion doing frontier medicine pre-motion picture, there can exist one where Beverly Crusher and Jack are doing some frontier medicine. I would adore that. Also,
I would love it.
Just to put my thumb on the scale, as much as I love Dayton, let's give it to Una McCormick.
Well, they just all make one. It's fine. Again,
all of them can make one. You're right.
Yeah, they could all do a trilogy, something. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the next segment, though, I did get a penny for your thoughts. So I'm going to do that right now.
Penny for your thoughts.
So Leslie on Patreon, she says, well, it was Bev who destroyed the Borg ship when she captained the Enterprise in The Next Generation, and then she helped destroy the Borg cube in Picard to save their son. So yes, the Crushers kicked butt. I think in her mind, it's like, we had the Borg, and yes, they were the antagonists, and yes, they were hard to beat. But again, Beverly did destroy a Borg ship, and then she helped destroy the Borg cube, and she was the one calling all, like, literally doing the shots while Data was driving. And I think that just really showcased her character. This was something that Gates even said. She's like, this is how Beverly always has been. She just never got to showcase it, right? Terry showcased it. As much as, again, I get torn because I love seeing her doing that and being the Borg Slayer. But then the emotional aspect, I just wish I saw her on the Borg cube, so that's where I was struggling a little bit. But the next one we're going to be doing is now the tricorder rating.
My tricorder.
So I actually got 5 votes this time because I'm starting it over at Patreon. And I had 3 things. I was like, you either love the Borg storyline, start to finish, love it, absolutely adore it. The other one is mixed feelings, but don't hate it. Okay. Or overused and made no sense. Okay. And we got 40% for the first 2 and then 20% for the last. Where do you land? Love it, mixed feelings, or hate it and just thought it was overused?
If it was everything but season 3 of Picard, I love the Borg storyline of Next Generation, including First Contact as well. I think First Contact is a wonderful button. It's all great. He snaps the spine, which is definitely healthy in terms of getting over your PTSD. It's what you want to do. You snap your abuser's spine. It's very constructive.
Very therapeutic. Yes.
Very therapeutic, for sure. I adore that. And then with season 3 of Picard, it feels a little perfunctory. I actually hear listening to your headcanon over here, and I'm like, I wish that the show itself was a little bit more thoughtful in terms of injecting that generational trauma in there a little bit more on the surface and engaging with that a little bit more, and instead it kind of mystery boxes those things to be like all of the Borg aspects are basically in the last 2 episodes, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to have to go mixed. So I'm going to have to go mixed feelings, but don't hate it.
I definitely was torn myself, especially I again plucked season 2 of Picard out, and I was like, ignore that doesn't exist, and doing the overall arc. And again, I do like how they did make Jack part Borg and stuff like that I thought was cool and it made sense. But yes, I think there was just some things that they missed in terms of the story, kind of overusing certain aspects a little bit too much. Maybe probably overusing his whole PTSD a little bit too much. Being just like, that's the main part. And it's like, yeah, we get it. He has PTSD. Instead of looking at everyone else's story. Because like I said, everyone was affected by this, not just Picard. So I'm probably in the mixed feelings, but don't hate it part as well. I think it's very close. It's very close. It just didn't quite hit the mark there. Over on Instagram, Leslie, I think I triggered Leslie, poor thing. She says she was so damn rude to Data, unacceptable. She was talking about Pulaski. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Leslie. I will warn you if I ever do anything about Pulaski so you do not get triggered. I will make sure of that. But speaking of the next episode, I am doing this thing called Sick Bay Spinner, and this is how we got this episode for Kenny here. I spun the wheel, and surprise, it landed on this one. And tomorrow I'm going to be actually sitting down with David, who was in Instagram, and we're going to be, talking about his time of working with Star Trek. But the following week, I'm going to be sitting down with Tim from FSF Popcast, who is still new to the Trek universe. So I'm curious of where the episode is going to land. So here is now the Sick Bay Spinner to let me know what my next episode is going to be. Well. He is getting time travel, and we're going to be talking about the original series, City on the Edge of Forever. This is actually going to be the first time I'm going to be talking about the original series of Crusher Combo. But of course, we'll throw in some more time travel than just talk about that episode. But yeah, Tim, hope you're excited. He's not a Kirk fan at all, so this is great.
Wonderful.
Love it. But yeah, I think it's kind of fun because then I don't have because then they can't get mad at me. They can get mad at the spinner, the little spinner there.
Yeah, it's the spinner's fault.
But yeah, so I'm excited about that. With Tim, we will be dropping that episode on the 21st. And now I'm going to go ahead and jump into my redhead alerts. And like I said, I get the chance to sit down with Star Trek actor David Jones, who was lucky to be on not just one, but 2 different installments. We will talk about his love for Trek and his future projects. So if you have any questions for David, please hit me up with a penny for your thoughts before noon tomorrow. And also, don't forget that Trek Talks is almost here. John Billingsley and Bonnie Gordon host to help benefit the Hollywood Food Coalition. For more information, please follow them on the socials at Trek_Talks and subscribe to their YouTube channel at Trek Talks Telethon. And of course, my conversation with John will drop on March 28th at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so please don't miss it. And my Patreon shoutouts go to Chuck and Leslie, who are my Commander patrons, and Engineer Mark, who is my Admiral patron. If you would like to support the podcast and enjoy exclusive extra content, just head over to patreon.com/Crusher Convo, and you can sign up for as low as $3 a month. All right, Kenny, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy you finally got to join me. Took 2 years, but we did it. And please let my listeners know where they can find you.
Absolutely. If you're interested in more Star Trek talk, you can head over to my podcast, Trek Wars, which you can find at trekwarspod.com or available wherever you listen to your podcasts. We try and answer the ultimate question in fandom, which is better, Star Trek or Star Wars, by going through both franchises in chronological release order. We just wrapped up Star Trek, the original series, and I believe we've just started season 2 of Star Wars, The Clone Wars, and we're on a brief hiatus because I moved. My podcast co-host Aspen is going through some big life changes of themselves, and so we're taking a hiatus because it's worth it to take a breath every once in a while. We got 100 episodes that you can still listen to. Again, trekwarspod.com. You can also find me on Letterboxd, find me on Blue Sky, Trek Wars Pod as well, and yeah, that's where you can find me. Good Lord. What a treat, Jesse.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to have talked to you today about all of this. Like I said, this was a very good, fun episode to discuss about Beverly Crusher and everything that she's gone through and what we wished we had. Sarah says, I remember being so upset and swearing off Star Trek when Pulaski took Beverly's place. Remember, I was a child. But then in season 3, my uncle told me Bev was back and I was happy again. And Jay Marie says, well, episode 1 had Bev blasting those changelings. She was blasting all throughout the season. Okay. Blazing Bev for sure. But like I said, I think that story arc with her almost dying in episode 1 to actually sacrificing Jack at the end, that's a huge, just like one, it's like, man, Beverly just can't catch a break. She gives birth to a traveler and a Borg. Like, can someone help the lady out here?
Which I did enjoy that part of her aspect where she's got serious abandonment issues of being like everything. This is why she kind of cut contact, because when something good happens to her, it kind of leaves.
Kind of fails a little bit. Yeah.
In some manner. And I appreciate that characterization, even though it is a little bit of a stretch, but also as a concern that is a genuine, like, they're really trying to like make sense of all of this, and I think it mostly works.
I think it mostly works. I know a lot of people were not happy to know that Beverly took off and hid the child, and again, I'm not a fan of it either, but I've just accepted it at this point. What am I going to do?
It's canon.
It's canon now, so there it is. But like Gates said, she really fought hard to have those lines put in. Like, I've lost my husband, I lost my parents, I lost my son. She just lost too much. And she, in a sense, lost Picard.
It's smart.
Right? Because he was always putting Starfleet first, no matter what, even when it was dangerous. And she just couldn't watch him destroy himself. She couldn't do it. And then she couldn't have their son watch that either, So I always say this, Trev from Salon Trek, she did the wrong thing for the right reasons. And that's just how it is. So I definitely, Beverly is a flawed character. She's human. She makes mistakes, but she does it for a reason. And it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just, it is what it is. J. Marie, one last thing. Yes, a comic graphic novel, Una Dayton or whoever wrote Death in Winter. Ooh, who did write Death in Winter?
Michael Jan Friedman.
Oh, look at you.
I know, right? That
is a good book.
It's wild that I just pulled that off the dome.
That was actually one of the very first books that I read when I got into my whole Trek thing, but it is a good book.
I'm sitting over here and I'm thinking about Star Trek Destiny, and I'm just going, like, in terms of Borg stories, that is, good Lord. I'm a relatively okay reader. I read regularly, and then I sped through Star Trek Destiny in a way that I have never sped through any other Star Trek books or just many books in general. I'm so impressed by that, and I'm just so impressed by the status quo that it left at the end of that series, and it made me so excited for the rest of the Splinter universe.
I think the whole expanded universe of Star Trek was so good, and then now it's all gone because of Picard. Sarah, you definitely got to read Death in Winter. It is a good book. But anyways, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Kenny. Thank you to everyone in the chat and Instagram. I appreciate you guys so much, and I look forward to the rest of season 3 of Crusher Convo, because I almost said Picard. Season 3 of Crusher Convo. There we go. Because I have so many great ideas coming your way. And again, here we go, guys. Live long and prosper. Bye, guys.
Crusher out.